Hello, everyone. See people trickling in. I'll give everybody a couple more minutes. But while we're getting started, if you could drop your title, what you do, and where you are at right now into the chat. I'd love to see where everyone's from and what you're working on. Hi, Alexandra. So exciting. So many math specialists. So everybody, thank you for dropping in who you are, what you do, and where you're from. Welcome to our webinar today, Addressing Math Anxiety in the K-5 Classroom. I'm very excited today. We're with Bethany Lockhart Johnson, one of our fabulous co-hosts of Math Teacher Lounge podcast that we're so proud of. So I'm very, very excited. Ooh, Greensboro, North Carolina. I am close to Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm very excited to get started today. And before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping tips to make sure that we're all getting the most out of this webinar today. If you'd like to access closed captioning, just hit the CC button in the bottom tray and then show subtitles. You can participate and make comments at any time via the chat, but the best way to get your questions answered is to submit using the Q&A function, and we'll have dedicated Q&A time at the end. And also, you will receive a certificate of attendance with your webinar recording via Zoom. So look out for that in the next couple of days after we close the webinar. And now I will kick it over to our host, Bethany, to get started.
Hi, welcome. So I'm a K-5 educator working in Southern California. Yeah, I want to say first that I think that the title is, yes, we're going to talk about math anxiety in the classroom, but I also want to talk a little bit about math anxiety in parents. And I will also be talking about teachers as well. So it was exciting also to see some pre-service teachers on there because that we know that a lot of that math anxiety often is not talked much about in your math pedagogy classes. We're trying to cram all that into like 1 or 2 quarters or semesters. So great to see you. Thanks for being here. I'm in Southern California. I had my BA from UC San Diego, my master's and multiple subject credential from University of California, Irvine. I was very involved in the arts, and so I love bringing that into the classroom. And currently, I'm co-hosting the Math Teacher Lounge podcast with Dan Meyer, who is, if you haven't listened to the Math Teacher Lounge podcast, I encourage you to do so. It's great. We have a lot of fun and have some fantastic guests. So today we are going to talk about defining math anxiety, who is impacted by it, and also some ideas for parents, caregivers, students, and teachers to help navigate math anxiety. And why do I care about it? It's because that person on the left there, besides having those kind of rocking bangs, I loved math at that point, or at least like I wasn't afraid of it. This was me entering 6th grade. Math was something that I enjoyed, I had fun with. I was often sent to a different classroom, like the next grade up, to do math. And it was something that was just like, yeah, math time. But the person on the right, who is in 10th grade, by that point, I was terrified, paralyzed, panic, anxiety going into my math classroom. And I had some traumatic experiences that involved shame and fear, and I would dread it, right? And if it sounds like I'm being melodramatic, I'm not. This was like my real lived experience in math class. So math anxiety was something that was very, very real real for me. I still navigate it, but now I have a lot of tools and I've reclaimed math. And in fact, in our season 4, episode 2, myself and Dan, we share our math biographies. And so I talk more about it there. Right now, I'm also a mama. So this is my 2-year-old, my very, very busy 2-year-old. And one of the things that we love doing is reading together. So I went to the store to look for some books, and I came across this book that is, it's called You Be Mommy. It's about a tired mommy who lets her daughter have a turn being the parent at bedtime. It's humorously charming, is how it's described. And you know what? I I gotta say, I'm a tired mommy. I'm like, this, yes, let's read this book. And I'm flipping through it, and I noticed that it said, it's talking about all the things that they do, right? They oh, mommy's tired. You walk the dog. You get to be mommy tonight. And it's saying, I helped with homework, even math. And I'm like, okay, they mention math, right? But let's zoom in a little bit. Like, there is nothing about this image that looked like they were having a good time. Looked like they were learning together, curious together, bonding together. Questions are great. Wondering is great. You don't have to know it all, nor should you as a parent. And yet, I think I interpret it as some anxiety here. And the illustrator being able to say, I helped with homework, even math. I know there's a big process in illustration. However, multiple steps. I feel like there were different interpretations. Like, I helped with homework, even math, and like they're having a parade, right? Or I helped with homework, even math. Oh, this is the pits, right? And so I feel like oftentimes math is kind of like the easy joke, and this, I see this all the time, right? That math is the thing that provokes real, palpable anxiety. So I want to talk a little bit about how we define math anxiety. On Math Teacher Lounge, we actually just finished up a whole season about math anxiety. And I will tell you that we have even more questions than we do answers. But it was wonderful, the season 5, it was wonderful to talk to all sorts of amazing educators who think about math anxiety, who are doing research about math anxiety. And I feel like we had some really thought provoking and interesting conversations. And I encourage you to check that out. Then up in the top left there, that's Dr. Gerardo Ramirez. And we talked about defining it. He was the first guest of our season. So California, we use the Common Core, and the Common Core state standards, they say that students who are successful in math, they see math as useful. They see it as sensible, useful, worthwhile endeavor. They believe in diligence and one's own efficacy. And math anxiety can block that ideal. So math anxiety is commonly defined as a feeling of tension, apprehension, fear. And Dr. Gerardo Ramirez, who I was just talking about, he really put that it's not just fear, it's the unknown, right? So there's some unknown moment when you might have to answer a math question or interact with math. It's that unknown combined with the fear that really brings up that anxiety. I also want to say that in this talk, I'm not specifically talking about dyscalculia, which is a very specific learning difficulty that oftentimes folks with dyscalculia do experience math anxiety, but there are other elements too. So sometimes when I define things, I also want to define it by what it's not, right? We'll do that strategy. And Sunil Singh, who is an Amplify math advisor, he gave this talk, and math storytelling, our innate wisdom and wholeness. And so when he searched for math anxiety, it's a screenshot from his talk, he immediately, 0.52 seconds, he got 58, almost 59 million results, right? And then he said, well, what about math wellness? And it said, do you mean match wellness? And he says, no, right? So when we try to look at, well, what would it mean to be whole and complete and joyful and well in math? We're not talking about that as much. So we tried to look at some of the questions like, where does it come from? Does math anxiety cause poor performance in math, or does poor performance in math lead to math anxiety? Is it about gender? Do we blame teachers or parents? Are people who are generally more anxious, are they more prone to math anxiety? And I feel like we don't have the answers, but what we do know is that it's real, right? So one of the other things I want to talk about is how it's screened for. This table gives all sorts of different screenings, right? And typically these screenings for math anxiety were for older students. And so researchers revised it so that it would be for younger students as well. So for example, you're in math class and your teacher is about to teach something new. So how do you feel? From not nervous at all to very, very nervous. And obviously testing for something like an anxiety, it's hard because in terms of like reporting out research, those tests have to be replicable. They have to be easy to administer, especially if you're asking a teacher to administer it, right? So how do we identify, unless students are self-identifying, that they have math anxiety? And there's also, researchers also talked about, when we talk to students about their experience with math, sometimes it's hard for them to distinguish, okay, is the student reporting that like ugh face because they just don't like it? They don't have anxiety around it, but they just don't like it? Or is it actual anxiety? So another questionnaire, they developed some new items that really started to also talk about the physiological responses. Like my heart starts to beat faster. I'm nervous, I'm worried. And I think all of these things, if you have math anxiety, you know somebody that does, you know that those physiological responses are often a big part of it. So we know that adults, teachers, including pre-service, teachers, including practicing teachers, coaches, can experience math anxiety, as well as parents and children. And originally, a lot of research you see will say, well, math anxiety can begin as early as the fourth grade. And you saw from that wide list of questionnaires, there's lots of different ways that it's screened for, but folks have really been pushing back against that idea that it's only in older kids or only in secondary students, and really saying that it can happen a lot sooner. I share this picture from, this was actually my mentor teacher, and she was, I feel like I learned so much from her about listening to students thinking. This was in a TK classroom, and I'll never forget that there was a student whose parents I know felt like they were doing the right thing by sending him to a supplemental program, which I will not name, that would allow him to have extra math practice on the weekends. And I remember the student saying, well, 2 plus 3 is 5. And my mentor teacher said, well, oh, wow, like, what, tell me about that. Can you show me with these blocks? And she had these blocks on the table. And the student had palpable fear on their face. And this TK is 4 years old, right? So already at that young age, the student didn't have that conceptual understanding. They knew the script, 2 plus 3 is 5, and were probably praised for being able to recite that quickly. But they already had that anxiety. And we know that it can happen in kids as young as that. You also see, this is something from Facebook, Family Circus. The new principal hasn't made much difference. We still have math. And I was reading some of the comments, and I like about the 100th comment of a person saying, oh, me too, little Billy. I kind of, tried to tune out. But I wanted to bring in a couple voices, and you may recognize some of yourself in some of these, or someone you know. And in the profiles that I'll quickly share, I will say that the names have changed, and also some of the quotes were edited down for conciseness. But I want to bring Renee into the space. Renee said that she feels like she's had math anxiety her whole life. Her daughter asks her for help with her homework, but it's a battle every single night. Usually ends up in tears, both hers and mine. Sasha feels like math is like another language that I don't speak. And Sasha shared a story about how she was working in a clothing store, and she felt like she was pretty confident with it. But then when she was, a customer asked her about a discount that the item was 15% off, and plus she had a 20% off coupon. So the customer was saying, well, so it's 35% off the whole. And Sasha's entering it into the register. She keeps getting a different answer. And the word she described where she felt like her brain was frozen, felt like she was going to pass out. Her manager had to come, what she called, to her rescue. And Andres is a father of two. He said, I'm not a math or a numbers person. And he used language like, I just choke. I choke when he was asked to solve math problems. And actually called math the number one reason that he hadn't finished his associate's degree. So themes I hear from adults navigating math anxiety are alienation from the subject, saying, oh, I'm not a math person, fear of math in public spaces and trying to avoid math, doing math in any way. So some student voices. Carlos is a 10th grader. He was reflecting that he would just write numbers in his homework. And, sometimes we're checking homework in the morning. We might be checking it quickly. He said his teacher just would like, is it done? Is there stuff on the page? He never understood it, but it didn't seem to matter. Carrie said that her math was after lunch and she'd get a stomach ache. So she'd miss math often. Or she'd go to the nurse's office, and when she came back, she wouldn't know what was going on. She would feel lost. Even, this didn't happen every day, obviously, but when it would happen, so then she's even more confused, and the anxiety for her just kept building. Ryan, I actually want to read this whole quote. He said, at the start of 6th grade, his math teacher said, oh, you guys learned all of this last year, referring to the review chapter that it was at the beginning of their textbook. And then she really rushed through the steps of the problem. He said, I have no idea how she got the answers. I guess I was supposed to learn it in 5th grade, but I didn't. And I didn't want to raise my hand to ask. So students often report they're recounting moments of math trauma. Math is seen as something they just have to get through. They're being told not to use fingers or tools, or they don't remember like specific lessons or strategies taught in class. And also stories of teachers who privilege certain students or their ability to solve problems quickly. And finally, I'll share some parents, some teachers. So Chelsea, she was a newer teacher, and she said when she was a pre-service teacher, what she was learning in her her pedagogy class was completely different from what she was seeing with her mentor teacher. And she asked her mentor teacher about it, and she said, oh, that's like idealistic what they're teaching you. But when you have 30 kids all at different levels, you're going to stick to that teaching guide, and you got to stay on pace with your team. And so she felt like she didn't really learn, well, how do I incorporate these ideas that I'm learning? And she felt like, again, there was a disconnect. And there's two more I'd like to share. Dustin, a 7th grade teacher, he felt like he taught by the book. So there's this great pre-service. He got all motivated and he got observed, and the principal was coming around to kind of see folks in the school trying out some of these strategies. So he was doing a share out of student solutions, and he got to a particular student and had no idea what that student did to solve it. And his own anxiety, like he panicked because he was so used to like knowing what was going on, but all of a sudden that unknown plus his fear of math already, he was like, he didn't know where to take the lesson next. Plus, being observed can be nerve-wracking. And finally, Marissa, they were doing teacher training about their new math curriculum, and something about finding the tens in 430. So she wrote down 3, and the rest of her team got 43. And she said it took her a second. Like she was like, wait, 43. I mean, she got it, but it seemed like the rest of the team, it had been automatic for them. And she said for her, it further reinforced this new book, new way of thinking, struggling to make sense of it. And oftentimes what I would hear from teachers is that they dread teaching math or professional development focused on math, a sense that they don't know enough math to venture from the textbook, frustration when there's changes in the math curriculum, and uncertainty how to support students who dislike or struggle with math. So I bring those voices in because I feel like there's some common threads, but it can have you interact with math differently in so many different aspects of your life, right? Whether you are teaching math and you are avoiding or like letting your instructional minutes get eaten away by, oh, well, we'll just do it during math time. And a lot of times it can be unconscious, but if you're avoiding that math. But I like to bring in those voices because I think it's so important to see that it can impact such a wide variety of students' experiences. But I also want to talk about what can we do to support it. We know that it's real. We know that it's there. So if you're a parent or caregiver, how can you support your students? And if you have math anxiety, hopefully you're helping to heal your own math anxiety in the process. So the first thing I want to say is find some room for fun, which, by the way, if this slide doesn't just scream fun, I mean, come on, right? 3 exclamation points. Research shows that when parents and young children take time to explore, enjoy, and talk about math together, it sets the stage for positive early math experiences and helps young children view themselves as capable math learners. And that was from an organization called Math Talk. We spoke with the founder of Math Talk, Omo Moses, season 1, episode 6, segment 3. And he spoke about how his app and his organization is about how do we use the community and how do we have space, like the area around the math is everywhere. And so they have an app as well as some math like installations that allows parents and caregivers to interact in a low risk, joyful way. Because they say that, every parent might want to ensure that their child's earliest math learning experiences are positive, but a lot of times families just don't know where to begin. And I also included a picture of his book as well. So fun in math could look like something like what Christopher Danielson does. One of the things he does at the Minnesota State Fair, he has you're walking along, you've got your fried Oreos, you've got your, whatever, fried Twinkies, and there's math on a stick. And so it's an opportunity for families to go in and interact with math in ways that they might not previously have interacted. So there's games and manipulatives, there's posters with questions, they have scavenger hunts. And it's like interrupting, like, math can be in spaces that we don't expect it, right? So one of the things that we found again and again in research is that parents' disposition of math and the way that they talk about math and their interactions with children and their children or the children that they're caregiving and math make a huge, huge difference. So again, running through some of these ways that we're not seeking out competition. You're almost like maybe you don't even realize you're doing what you would call math because it's something like it's not what you would automatically think of when you think of math. Oftentimes, you might have heard like PTAs or teams will put together family math nights and opportunity to share what a lot of times are student-led games. So the students are getting to share things with their families, or families are getting to see how to interact with math in a positive way or in a way that they would have never thought of. I've also seen schools do things like drop everything in math instead of just drop everything and read. And again, the goal is that it's positive, that it's fun. Games like Chutes and Ladders or Quicks, playing these games that again are using number sense, but are a way to interact in positive ways. We interviewed Dr. Marjorie Schaefer in season 5, episode 5, and her research team did the research behind bedtime math. And again, bedtime math was with the goal of building playful and joyful interactions with families. So what her research found is that high anxious parents, when they're interacting with their children, those children learn less math over the year. And she said oftentimes it's something like, let's say you're reading a book that has elements of math on it, but if you're a math anxious parent, you may avoid talking about the math in it and instead point to, let's talk about the colors. So it's not that you're not trying to learn with your child, but you're pointing something out that kind of avoids opportunities for math. So the app is one way that, again, it's playful, it's fun, it's low stakes, low risk, things that if you're math anxious, you don't typically connect together. I also flagged a couple shows, Team Umizoomi, and which you can still find episodes of, and Number Blocks, which is currently on Netflix. Again, ways that you're seeing math in new ways, again, playful. So all of these, again, are invitations to engage in math in positive ways that can be you having fun with your kiddo, but also helping you to redefine and reclaim math for yourself. I also like to highlight the amazing Kristen Gray. Her and her team developed talking math, actually during lockdown and distance learning through illustrative mathematics. And talking math presents an image. So students look, or your kiddos look at this image of these oranges, and then they have questions that are based on grade level. So you might ask your kindergarten, like, how many do you see? How do you see those? Wait, let's count them together. And you might get into a conversation of, oh, those are whole ones, but those are cut in half. And how do you add those, right? And again, in kindergarten, you might look at this image and you're saying, well, what do you notice? What questions do you have? What do you wonder about? Oh, what's the lightest thing you see? What's the heaviest thing you see? And it's a way that as a parent, you're learning new ways to interact around math. And so hopefully you might see a billboard or you might see something out on your walk. And again, you're interacting with it in a way that allows you to incorporate elements of math. And again, you're helping to redefine what math can look like. And most importantly, research found that really the biggest thing is examining your own conversations about math. So these quotes here are from parent-teacher conferences or conversations I've had with parents, and kids are learning from your disposition. This isn't how I learned it. Why did they change math? Or I've heard parents say, no, you look at the check, I'm not a numbers person, or friends say that. I'm not a math person, or, oh, I always hated math too, right? These conversations that are impacting your disposition really, really matters. And I think back to Renee, when she was talking about what a battle homework was. And, you know, I remember very distinctly having parents say that homework was a battle, or math homework was a battle. And the goal is that, again, you're having that positive relationship. So, as a parent, if you're math anxious, you might want to seek out community resources. Our public library has homework help where you can go to the library and there are folks there who will sit with your kiddo and do homework with them. You can ask your kiddo to teach you what they do know, or you can ask them, well, what do we know about this problem? If you can, communicate with the child's teacher. Again, sometimes that's not possible or positive, but we hope, right, that we're building this positive relationship with our kiddos' teachers and that you're able to communicate about what's the best way to help around topics that they're covering. And the biggest thing too, in terms of that, I would say avoiding the homework battle. Even if that means sometimes you're opting out or not completing the whole assignment, or you say, you know what, we're just going to do what we know, or we're going to do as much as we know. And then let's write out some questions like, I'm not sure what to do here. Or what. So you're showing, well, we tried, but I'm not sure. Cultivating and maintaining a positive relationship around math and schoolwork in general is way more important than one assignment, excuse me. If you're a student and you navigate math anxiety, a couple things that I want to share that I have found that have been super helpful. Examining your own story. Feel free to rewrite it if you need to. A lot of times too, we talk about writing, not just researchers were talking about teachers providing opportunities for students to write before exams or before high stakes testing. But as a student, you could also do that even if your teacher is not providing the opportunity. Writing down your thoughts and your feelings before a test. You're freeing up your working memory by getting all of that down. And your working memory, where you're doing those calculations and where you're solving those problems, you're helping to free that up because the anxiety or the worry that you're putting that out. I love this. I didn't know about this. I found this when I was researching, when I began researching math anxiety. And I love this math anxiety Bill of Rights, and a few that really resonated with me. The right to ask questions, the right to need extra help, the right to view myself as capable of learning math. Those are things that I still tell myself and that I have to remind myself. And how, as a student, can you find these? I'm like, what if a teacher had shared some of these as we were cultivating our math community? And if you're a teacher, maybe there's a way you can incorporate some of these things as you're building your math community. ask for help. And if you're a student who's struggling with math anxiety, and I will say navigating math anxiety, actually, if your first attempt doesn't work, try again. So if you ask for help, or if you have looked for a certain resource and that didn't work, or maybe your teacher offered a resource and time working with the teacher didn't help, try again. Because there are so many resources out there. And it could be that you need to find a video. You and your parent or your caregiver help look up a video on how to do it, or friends or study groups, going to office hours, math learning centers. I don't think any of those are necessarily easy, but they're so important. So let's talk about teachers. So as a teacher myself, especially one who's navigating math anxiety, I feel like this is super close to my experience, and I want to talk about two aspects for teachers. And again, this is including pre-service teachers. This is if you have math anxiety, but I also want to talk about if you're supporting students who have math anxiety, whether you have anxiety or not. So if this is your experience when you think about math, if you're all the way on that end of the scale, I want to share, we talked to Dr. Heidi Subnani in season 5, episode 4, and her research showed us that teachers with math anxiety, when they're given professional development choices, they will typically avoid math-related content, which that makes sense. They taught less math over the course of the year. And sometimes, again, that looked like when they're trying to schedule maybe a reading assessment, or they're trying to schedule like pulling students one-on-one. Maybe they're pulling during a math time, or those little instructional minutes, even if it might seem small in that day, like, oh, it was just 5 minutes, over the course of the actual instructional minutes, it starts to eat away. And a lot of times it's not consciously. Like, no teacher that I know wants their students they all want their students to succeed. But when you yourself have math anxiety, oftentimes you avoiding it or teaching less can happen without you even realizing it. Oftentimes, too, if you are a teacher with math anxiety, you might rely on rote teaching or methods that were ineffective, but they're very familiar. So maybe it's something that you remember your teacher doing, and maybe it didn't really work, but that's what you've seen and that's what you know how to do. And so you have anxiety and you're like, I don't know what to do. Let me rely on this. So Dr. Subnani showed a few things that were very successful. Again, I mentioned Dustin at the beginning of this talk, because what I loved is that he went to a workshop and he felt that panic, right? And a lot of times, like, I put this back in here because of that rote teaching. With sometimes when you're like, I don't want to give up that control of knowing what my students' responses are going to be, or potentially veering away from what's in the teacher manual, right? So if I step out on a limb and have a student share out where students are showing me ways that I didn't even know, what do I do? And how do we cultivate a space if you're navigating math anxiety, where it's okay not to know, and where you're saying, can another student explain? Why don't, like, the student explains what they did, and then you have another student explain it, and and how do you create an environment where, as a teacher, you're not pretending or saying that you have to know it all, or you are going to predict it. I found some of the most fun moments were when I got a completely unexpected answer and I said, wait, let's go over this again. Tell me more about your thinking, and just really listened and attended to the student, even if that was a little bit scary, because as a teacher, I didn't know what was going to happen next. But that's when those connections in that community was really, really being built. So in her research, she showed that math anxiety in teachers was lessened when teachers had opportunities, first of all, to even validate their math anxiety or math story. And they spent time not only validating, but actively envisioning what their math classroom culture could look and feel like. So oftentimes teachers had a very specific instance or instances where they knew that their experience in math class was not positive. So by acknowledging that they were navigating math anxiety, and then looking at, but what do I want my classroom to feel like for myself as a teacher, and also for my students? Teachers navigating math anxiety that lesson, when they were able to participate in teaching and learning cycles where upcoming units were unpacked and planned for in advance of teaching. So when there was enough time, not only to talk about how they were going to teach the lessons, but to really help them understand the mathematics, right? And so often, it's just very easy to get into this, like, okay, what are we teaching tomorrow? What are we teaching tomorrow? Which that's going to happen, right? But where are there moments when we can look ahead, or we can, as a team, unpack and look ahead, and not so much predict? You don't know exactly. Well, it's just, I recognize, I want to acknowledge that that's difficult to do. And I have found that that's difficult to do. But when there were opportunities to do that, that gave teachers space, time, breathing room. And another thing that was really successful is when a teacher with math anxiety was able to observe, in her study, a coach teaching her class. So she was able to be, the teacher in the study was able to be in the classroom, learn, like as a learner, watching this person who's a coach who was not actively navigating math anxiety, working with her students, using positive and affirming teaching strategies, and playing math games with her students. And she was able to walk around and listen and also just learn from those strategies. Those things help to lessen that math anxiety that teachers were experiencing. Something that I want to say has been really powerful, and something that was important when you are going to unpack that content knowledge, there are so many resources out there that when you have this space and time to unpack a unit or to really do deep dives, it can help really with that richness and that multi-layered learning of what's actually happening in the mathematics. And that confidence in, like, oh, I understand this. I feel like I know the content, my content knowledge feels stronger, helped lessen that. So again, California is a Common Core state standard, and the progressions are a really powerful resource. So you're taking something, no matter which grade, you're taking something and you're looking at, how does this idea build over the grades? And how do you, where your students are, where they're going, where they were last year, how can you look at this and really understand the evolution of this mathematical concept? And another tool that I want to point out, an organization, Achieve the Core, has something called a coherence map on achievethecore.org, which is a really great tool that I definitely use many times. I'll show you a very quick video of basically what happens is, when you're in there, you select your grade, and what you're doing is you're mapping the standard. So if you're looking at number and operations in base 10, for example, you can look at the standard, where it is in relation to the grade that they're going into, the skills that we're building to that standard, and then also where you're going next. And when you map the standards, when you pull out from the map, it's pretty amazing to see this really intricate, how everything is connected and how the skills build on each other. And I've also found it helpful in my understanding, if there's a concept that I'm not understanding and I can see, oh, you know what, but I really know about that. I know about that piece of it that came before it. How can I look at that link between what was happening in second grade for number and base 10 and what's happening in fourth grade, right? How can you understand what that has to do with fractions, for instance? Another thing that teachers who navigate math anxiety can take advantage of are opportunities to learn alongside, to be the learner. So something like a mather day. Math So Fun, we do it on Saturdays. So the amazing Teresa Wills, she hosts these events where I look at the title Ratio and Rates, and I feel a little anxious. I'm like, okay, that might be the perfect thing for me to drop in, because it's low stakes. It's a chance for me to just learn and to help make sense of it more. On X, formerly known as Twitter, there are some resources too. You can join in the conversation or just lurk. Hashtag MTBOS, Math Twitter Blogosphere, or Elementary Math Chat have been great resources. I'll show you a couple examples. of different things that folks have put on YouTube videos, redefining what it means to be good at math, a video where they're showing the measure or the distance of this little toy. Why carve a math pumpkin? Why not? Come on, some math humor there. Showing different things. I've been struggling to teach multiplying mixed numbers in a conceptual way. And so they're sharing how sticky notes helped make that come alive for them and their students, quotes that have resonated. You can also follow conferences. Like maybe you don't want to go to a math conference or you can't for whatever reason, but you can follow the Twitter hashtag or the X hashtag for that conference, and you can so many attendees will post either the live chat at the session, or they'll post slides or takeaways from that session. And so I found that really helpful when I can't go to a session or if I couldn't attend the conference. So there's ways to, start dipping your toe into these experiences that will hopefully be more positive in math. These are some more examples of teachers showing student work, showing what they did on the board, a share out. Another thing that I think is so important, and so many of our guests on the podcast talked about, is that when you have math anxiety or your students have math anxiety, making space and validating the story, right? Validating that you have math anxiety. I gave a talk at ShadowCon, which was a part of National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, an annual conference that happens, and they used to have ShadowCon where you'd go up and talk about your math story. And so I shared a story about where my math anxiety, one of the most painful moments of my math anxiety, where a teacher told me that I didn't belong in math class. And I felt like in writing it and then also validating that my math anxiety was real was so helpful in me making sense of it, and part of like reclaiming math and saying, wait, I get to do math too. Like I'm a mathematician, and whether I'm working with kindergartners or with sixth graders, whatever, I get to be creating my math story and healing that trauma that led to palpable anxiety. And I think so much for teachers, is finding an ally. So often I hear that, or like the voice I was sharing, one of the teachers saying she didn't know what the rest of her team had done. How can you find an ally or somebody who is within your school, even if it's not within your team, that you can talk about the math with, or you can talk through a share out with, or you can say, you know what, let's try this. If you yourself as a teacher are curious about your own anxiety and find resources, math doesn't have to be your favorite subject, but there's ways that you can help shift your experience with math. And we know how much our language and how we talk about math and our disposition about mathematics matters. And then I also finally want to talk about, if you're a teacher supporting students who have math anxiety, I first want to say that all students they need and are worthy of multiple opportunities to engage in problem solving and sense making processes. They are capable of making sense of a given context, even if it takes them longer, or they may not be able to articulate how they made sense of something. And our students bring such a tremendous amount of knowledge and schema to the math classroom. And again, they're influenced by our disposition of mathematics and the classroom environment. So how can you make space for your students' math story? A teacher that I know gave a mathography, and at the beginning of the year, they would ask their student to write a math biography. This article, Math Curse or Math Anxiety, is a questionnaire, and you could ask just one of these. You don't have to give the whole thing. You could just say, ask a few of the questions. And this was poignant. I think my parents like or dislike math, right? And, teachers hearing about, like, students know what their parents' disposition is about mathematics. My best or worst experience in math class, validating that anxiety can be hard, but it can be very powerful, because what we're seeing, and again, I'll bring up Dr. Gerardo Ramirez, he's saying, we're interpretation making beings, right? So if I struggle at something, I can interpret it as, oh, I'm stupid, or I'll never get it. That is an interpretation. Or I could say, wow, math is hard. And you know what? I need to look at this, or what do I know about this? Or here are some tools. And the more you know about your students' math stories, the more that you can help create that community for those learners. I loved this question. If I could change one thing about my math class, it would be, in season 4, episode 4, we talked to authors Sarah Strong and Gigi Butterfield about their great book, Dear Math. I loved this book, Why Kids Hate Math and What Teachers Can Do About It. And I really loved the way that they didn't just invite students to pour out their story, right? It's about what they really did with those stories and how she read each one and she used them to, again, help build her classroom community. It wasn't just like, here, pour out your math anxiety, and then like I stick it in a drawer and I never see it. No, it became like a living document and a conversation with the student. So you can ask your kiddos to write Dear Math letters. When we think about math anxiety, we think about how can we enhance a student's self-concept. So when we think about self-concept and self-efficacy, we're thinking about your competence beliefs. How competent does that student feel? What do you feel about your ability? So again, that interpretation that you're making, the meaning that you're making. How can you help build that student's self-concept? So we assess self-concept with some of those things, like how good do students think they were at math, or how do they expect to do in the future, or what do they feel like when they're learning something new? But for all of our students, we want students to be able to build their belief in themselves, their competence, their capabilities, their sense that they can persevere. And I want to share a few ways. I want to share first that like research shows that with math anxiety, some of the tools that people use for anxiety in general, like deep breathing, storytelling, the writing, some of those things about like the emotional regulation can be very, very helpful, particularly before when you're tackling assignments or before an exam. Then there's also things that are unique to math anxiety. And so I want to end talking about some ways that our classroom can be environments where students feel safe taking risks as they share their sense making. And we want students to have that those skill building, we want them to have those tools of, I know I can take deep breaths. I know that I can do visualization techniques. Those can be really helpful for students. But then how can you make your classroom a space where where that student who's navigating math anxiety feels safe? So I share this picture. This is a student who her growth over the year in her self-concept, in her ability, and feeling like she could try new things was so monumental. And during this share out, what I loved is she's sharing how it made sense to her, right? She is sharing, this is how solving this problem made sense to her. So how can I give opportunities and create opportunities where students feel safe enough to do that? I want a space where students solve problems in ways that make sense to them. Classroom routines help broaden what doing math looks and feels like. Like some of the routines I'll share might not feel like we're doing math, but you are. And especially where tool use is a part of the sense-making process and where tool use is celebrated. So I want to say before I share these next routines and round out the talk, I want to say that in no way am I suggesting that you go dive and try all of these things. What I have found most successful is if I found a buddy who said, okay, let's both try this, and then let's talk about it beforehand, and then let's come back and talk about it again. And like pick one you want to try. Okay, this week I'm going to try this one new thing, especially when you're trying to be intentional about creating that space for your students and you're trying to be mindful of their math anxiety or their experience in math and yours as well. So one routine that, again, can be fun, low risk, low stakes, and lots of opportunities for entry is something called Which One Doesn't Belong, where you show these pictures and you ask your student which one doesn't belong. And the key with it is that you have students who are giving you reasons, like any of them could be things that don't belong, right? So on the right, like each of these, I could come up with a reason why each of these things doesn't belong, right? I might say, oh, the apple is the only red thing, or maybe, so it doesn't belong. Or maybe I say, oh, the cone is the only thing that's not alive at some point, so maybe it doesn't belong. Oh, the tiger is the only animal, it doesn't belong. The pumpkins, that's the only thing where there's 3 of them. Like, who knows what your students are going to come up with, right? And it's the point that even a student who is math anxious can contribute in a way that feels low risk and hopefully relatively safe. Another routine that can be really joyful is counting collections. There's an amazing book, Choral Counting and Counting Collections, Transforming the Pre-K to 5 Math Classroom, that is just an amazing resource or tool. Here's an image from a student doing counting collections. And again, this is an opportunity where the student is counting a collection in a way that makes sense to them. And you're sharing out ways that the students counted their collections made sense. Sometimes they're working in teams, sometimes they're working separately. What do you notice and wonder? So you can show an image and you just want to know, what do your students notice? I showed this in my class. I remember a student said, looks like the pumpkins are doing yoga, right? And I didn't understand. I was like, what do you mean? And for her, she saw that those look like maths to her, right? So she's participating in a way that makes sense to her. And that's beautiful. That's great. We may not talk about density or weight or, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, right? To hear what students come up with. What's the same, what's different, right? So students have a chance to talk about what do they notice in each of these images. So in the elephant feather picture, okay, what's the same about them? And students generate lists and lists and lists about what's the same, what's different. And then the same with the dinosaur picture. And there are tons of these available. You can make your own. My team and we used to make our own, and you can have students make their own and share it out. And then another thing is celebrating mathematical residue. So these are 2 routines that we had in my classroom. What do you know about 10 and ways to make? So what do you know about, and it's whatever number. And so students would share out their ideas and then also leave out Post-its where students could keep adding to, right? For that student who needs some more time to think, or needs that maybe doesn't feel comfortable sharing, but will think of an idea that they really want up there and can put it on that Post-it and put it up. Ways to make. So students would come up with all the different ways they can make this number. And then again, they could add to it with Post-its. And then as we're talking about it, students were noticing connections. So like, for example, that's why the 14 plus 0, 14 minus 0, and 0 plus 14 were circled in pink, because they were talking about the connection. And finally, I want to talk about tool use. So there's an amazing article, Got Tools. It's talking about tool use. And sometimes the reason I wanted to include a conversation about tool use is because oftentimes tools come up in conversations about math anxiety. And the common thread is students saying that they were embarrassed to use a tool, or a kiddo made fun of them for using a tool, or they felt like they would look stupid if they used a tool. So tools can be a powerful part of sense making, and it can be something that can make it a problem much more concrete and accessible, especially if it's a concept that students need support with. Tool use can be really, really powerful. So I invite you to think about, what does it look like in your classroom? And so in my classroom, every time, this is a kindergarten classroom, every time we had a tool, we would do a quick tool talk and we'd add it to the list, right? So so the first day we started this poster. This was a living document in the classroom. So the first day they were using pencils, they were using crayons, and they were using a clipboard. So, excuse me. So as we talked about it, we would add it up there, right? And eventually we used a Reckon Rec. We put that up there. Eventually we used a ruler. So we talked about how these were tools, and it really made it palpable for students. Are they accessible in the classroom? Do you celebrate the use of them? And I know that there's some valid fears. What if the students make a mess? What if they play with them? What if they get dependent on them? But it is worth it to find a way to incorporate tool use in a way to make that makes sense for a student and celebrate it. So this is a share out where a student is being celebrated and lauded for their, like, oh, I love how, tell me about how you use these tools. So it's normalized that we use tools and we talk about how we use them. Connections through storybooks can be a really great way for you to find ways to build those connections, mathematical conversations in a way that feels non-threatening. There's a great book that we recommend, that I recommend, Mathematizing Children's Literature, and we talked to the authors in season 3, episode 2. I also share you can bring families along with along on the math journey. Could you make a short Zoom video, or could you send home a unit letter, or make sure families know what's going on in ways they can support their kiddos at home in a way that's positive. Having your students write about it. Again, I know that's come up a lot, but it's something that's been a really powerful tool. Repeating tests and assignments to allow students a chance for evidence of growth. And again, we don't have time to repeat every test, but in a formative way. Could we give a test week 7 that we gave week 2? And the students can actually see evidence of their growth because, oh, wow, this felt really impossible week 2, but now week 7, like, I have some more tools. I get this a bit more. And one last thing I want to share, that Sarah Strong in her book shared that her upper class students she'd invite them to go to the grade and help a student who's in the grade where they first experienced math anxiety. And she found that so powerful for the students because they were really seeing like, oh, wow, I have made growth. Again, that evidence of growth, building their self-concept. When you allow for tasks that allow multiple points of entry and aren't just focused on something like a time test where the goal is move fast, you're allowing for multiple ways for those students to engage. So I share a problem where a student who wrote a lot, used a number bond, wrote an equation, was able to participate the same as a student that drew the rabbits, right, in this particular problem. There's multiple ways for these students to engage and explore. Or if a problem in your textbook asks something like use a number bond and use an equation to solve this problem, how can you open it up? So we made this problem about 9 and 0. We opened it up and used our little class mascot, which was an elephant, and said, well, he thinks it's 9 plus 0 equals 0. Is he correct? And it became a conversation, and it became something that was far less pressure than it has to look this way. Again, our teachers are influenced by your disposition in your classroom environment. I share some resources here that have definitely helped shape the way that I think about math, especially Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You'd Had by Tracy Johnston Zager. You can find us Math Teacher Lounge at MTL Show and our Facebook group, Math Teacher Lounge. And I know we're really close to the end. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, but I want to say, if there are some questions, I will follow up and answer those questions in our Facebook group, Math Teacher Lounge community. And those are our resources or references. And thank you so, so much for our time today.
Thank you, Bethany. That was wonderful. I can't believe how many tips you shared. It was incredible. So I don't think we even have any Q&A questions. I didn't see any, although I do see Nadia, you raised a hand. If you could drop your question in the chat or in the Q&A box, we can answer that for you.
I know. I also feel like I talk at Warp Speaks. I'm like, let me brain dump all of these, and if you pull one out, awesome. No pressure to use them all.
So for any other questions, I don't see it. Nadia, if you want to drop it in the Q&A. Oh, there it is. Well, I don't see the question, but I see.
And you can also reach us on, like we said, at MTL Show or through Amplify. I know Shannon dropped in some resources there. Happy to continue the conversation in our Facebook group, Math Teacher Lounge.
Yes, please. We will answer questions there. And thank you, everyone, so much. Oh, Nadia does have a question. Bethany, if you can stay on for a couple of minutes. Wondering what's the best way to make sure stations help students?
I think I would have some follow-up questions about that. What exactly are the goals of those stations? Again, are the stations or the activity that's happening at the stations opportunities for students to enter, have multiple points of entry, right? So if I walk up to the station and I'm being asked to do something that helps me bring knowledge that I already have, along with trying something new. Am I working with a team? Are there tools that I'm available to use? So I don't know exactly what stations look like in your classroom, but I know that if I'm thinking of stations the way you're talking about it, where I have my students rotating to different areas, again, I want to be intentional with those activities and make sure that every single student in my class will be able to access it in a way that feels good. And sometimes that means using partners or groups, or telling students, talk about it, ask questions. You're walking around, you're answering questions. And again, that tool use can be so important in celebrating that tool use, so that students know that a struggle is a good thing, so that you're helping to build their interpretations you're helping to build an alternative interpretation to, like, I'm not good at math because I'm not fast. You're helping them build the interpretation of, wow, it takes me some time to figure out this. Oh, let me ask some more questions. Let me think about it.
Thank you so much, Bethany. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have more questions, like Bethany said, go to Facebook and go to our Math Teacher Lounge community, and you can drop your questions there. And thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Shannon.